On the night of June 4, 1943, in Mexia, Texas, Unificia Vera Burkhardt sat hunched over a small, hidden diary, the pencil trembling slightly in his hand as he recorded thoughts that would have earned him solitary confinement had they been discovered by his fellow officers. He could hardly believe what he had just seen. The Americans must be lying, he thought. No nation, locked in a two-front war, could possibly possess such abundance, such mastery over technology, such effortless comfort. Through the train window, he had witnessed a scene that contradicted everything Nazi propaganda had hammered into his mind over the past 3 years. Electric lights blazing from every farmhouse, street corner and shop window, stretching endlessly across the Texas plains at 10 o'clock at night. In Germany, blackout regulations had plunged the Reich into darkness since 1940. And even before the war, rural electrification had reached barely 20% of farms. Yet here, in the heart of what Nazi propaganda had described as a decadent, collapsing America, electricity flowed like water, lighting towns, streets, and homes as if the night itself were conquered. The train doors opened, and 1,850 veterans of the Africa Corps stepped down, not from cattle cars or cramped freight wagons, but from cushioned Pullman coaches equipped with dining services, padded berths, and observation decks that offered panoramic views of a land that defied every expectation. The entire town of Mexia had turned out to witness their arrival, cheering, waving, and offering a welcome that the German soldiers had never imagined. None of them knew it yet, but this moment would mark the beginning of a profound psychological transformation, one that would systematically dismantle the Nazi ideology they had been raised to defend. The collapse had begun months earlier in Tunisia, where General Jürgen von Arnim surrendered with approximately 250,000 German and Italian soldiers, the once feared veterans of the Desert War, men who had driven the British back to Egypt and earned the grudging respect of Field Marshal Montgomery, now prisoners of the very nation they had been taught to despise. Among them was Hetman Friedrich Radke, holder of the Iron Cross First Class and a veteran of multiple campaigns, whose diary, discovered decades later in the National Archives, would provide historians with a meticulous account of the psychological impact of American captivity. From the makeshift camps of Aruran, Algeria, where tens of thousands of prisoners waited for transport, the Americans' efficiency began eroding Nazi preconceptions. Identity cards were photographed and filed, medical examinations conducted, inoculations administered, and Geneva Convention rights explained in fluent German by officers specifically trained for this moment. But the first shock came in the form of food. Oberreiter Hans Muir, captured with the 21st Panzer Division, wrote to his mother months later that the Americans fed them better in the cage at Aruran than they had eaten in 6 months of desert warfare. White bread, real coffee, meat twice a day. Far from propaganda, this was simply standard military ration. Then came the Liberty ships, monumental symbols of industrial capacity. The SS Robert E. Peary had been built in just 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes at the Kaiser shipyards in Richmond, California, a fact that German soldiers would have dismissed as impossible propaganda. These ships, produced at a rate of 3 per day at the height of production, returned from Europe carrying up to 30,000 prisoners per month, revealing that American industrial might could not merely supply its own military, but also handle the logistical complexity of caring for tens of thousands of enemy soldiers. The 2-week Atlantic crossing offered a second phase of psychological demolition. Feldwebel Kurt Zimmermann of the 90th Light Division wrote home that the ship's crew disposed daily of more food than his entire company had eaten in weeks of desert fighting. Half-eaten steaks, loaves of bread, gallons of milk were thrown away without thought, not to mock, but because to Americans supply was limitless. These ships became floating classrooms in industrial and technological power. Prisoners learned that each vessel was one of 2,110 Liberty ships built during the war, each requiring 250,000 parts from factories across 32 states, assembled with coordination that made German wartime logistics appear primitive. Engines were built in 3 separate factories and assembled at ports that had scarcely existed 2 years prior. Radar, thought to be secret German technology, rotated above the bridges of cargo ships. It was at this moment, as ships approached the American coast, that Lieutenant Colonel Wilhelm von Stobern, scion of a Prussian aristocratic family steeped in military tradition, first suspected that Germany had already lost the war. On August 2, 1943, at Norfolk Naval Base, Virginia, the first sight of America shattered all remaining Nazi illusions. The base sprawled across 4,300 acres, docks stretching for miles, cranes unloading dozens of ships simultaneously, handling in a single day more tonnage than Germany's entire port of Hamburg managed in a week. Soldiers who had once counted on the Reich's industrial superiority were stunned to see ordinary laborers operating machinery with ease, driving their own cars to work, and living in comfort beyond the reach of most German citizens. And then came the trains, full passenger coaches with air conditioning, padded seats, and dining cars with white tablecloths and silver cutlery, not boxcars or cramped military wagons. Hetman Radke marveled. "We boarded like tourists, not prisoners," as the trains carried them across Virginia, Tennessee, Kentucky, and into the American heartland. Prisoners pressed their faces against windows, watching a world that could not exist according to Nazi teachings. Towns blazed with illumination. Factories ran night shifts. Streets were lined with cars. Homes, shops, and public buildings shone with electric lights. Factories dwarfed anything they had seen in Germany. The Alcoa aluminum plant consuming more power than all of Munich, synthetic rubber plants producing 800,000 tons annually, and the Willow Run plant outside Detroit assembling B-24 Liberators at a pace unimaginable. 1 bomber every 63 minutes. Prisoners saw mechanized cotton gins, combines harvesting hundreds of acres per day, and grain elevators storing enough wheat to feed entire German provinces. At stockyards, they observed tens of thousands of cattle awaiting slaughter, the smell of meat filling the air, workers eating sandwiches while German soldiers had subsisted on mere hundreds of grams per week. The camps themselves, built rapidly, with electricity, running water, flush toilets, hot showers, and steam heating, astonished the prisoners. Hospitals were better equipped than most civilian German facilities, with X-ray machines, surgical instruments, penicillin, and advanced pharmaceuticals. Camp kitchens featured walk-in refrigerators, automated mixers, and gas ranges capable of feeding thousands, offering rations of milk, eggs, meat, vegetables, and bread in quantities unimaginable to German civilians. Prisoners assigned to labor in farms, mills, canneries, and factories witnessed American industrial might firsthand. The combination of abundance, efficiency, and dignity eroded their belief in Nazi ideology, while exposure to education programs, English, sciences, mathematics, and correspondence courses from universities such as the University of Chicago and Stanford opened minds to democracy. Free markets and civil society, American generosity extended beyond work and education. Prisoners saw former Italian allies treated with respect after Italy's surrender. And Christmas 1943 brought 500,000 packages, church choirs, and community feasts. The psychological blow was complete. Men who had been indoctrinated to hate now saw that Americans could fight a war with unmatched efficiency, yet extend kindness and human decency to their enemies. By early 1944, prisoners no longer argued when presented with evidence of industrial and societal superiority. Their letters, diaries, and camp newspapers reflected curiosity and admiration rather than defiance. The Normandy invasion of June 6, 1944, delivered the final confirmation. 6,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft, and 150,000 men in the first wave. Supported by meticulous logistics and unmatched production, crushed the illusions they had been taught. The American industrial and organizational capacity had not only defeated Germany, but demonstrated a society whose strength lay in its freedom, cooperation, and capacity to create. By 1945, over 371,000 prisoners had returned to a devastated Germany, carrying knowledge that would seed post-war reconstruction, industrial revival, and democratic governance. Many became ambassadors of American methods in agriculture, industry, and politics, contributing to the Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle of West Germany. They had arrived as indoctrinated soldiers of the Third Reich, but left as witnesses to the power of democracy, industrial abundance, and human dignity, forever transformed by the example they had seen. In the end, the greatest American victory was not on the battlefield, but in the prison camps where the simple, undeniable reality of prosperity, efficiency, and kindness converted enemies into friends and built the foundations of a democratic Europe. The German prisoners in America had come expecting scarcity, weakness, and decadence. They found abundance, strength, and humanity. Returning home not merely as survivors, but as instruments of post-war redemption, carrying the seeds of freedom that would flourish for generations. The trains that first carried them into captivity in 1943 brought warriors. The ships that returned them in 1946 carried educators, reformers, and witnesses to the arsenal of democracy at its zenith. Through observation, through experience, through the undeniable reality of American society, these men were converted not by propaganda, but by truth, by a society that demonstrated that real power lay not in weapons, not in conquest, but in the ability to create, sustain, and uplift.